This program is brought to you by the HstvZim She Leads project with support from Embassy of Ireland in Pretoria.
Hello everyone, welcome to yet another edition of the Rebound series. My name is Farai Mwakutuya and it is a pleasure to have you joining us today where we are focusing on sexual harassment. I must emphasize that this program is brought to you by the HstvZim She Leads project with the very generous support from the Embassy of Ireland in Pretoria. Now the focus of today's program, as I mentioned earlier, is on sexual harassment, and this is in view of ongoing public hearings, a process that is ongoing by Parliament. Two portfolio committees, that is the one on public service, labor and social welfare, as well as women affairs, gender, community and enterprise development. They've been reaching out to different parts of the country to find out and undertake hearings on sexual harassment, and we'll be finding out what the purpose of those hearings is, as well as just unpacking what sexual harassment is and what's being done to clamp down on it and address it. To join me to do that, I have in the studio two guests. Abigail Machai is the director of the Zimbabwe Women Lawyers Association. Abigail, great to have you on the program.
Thank you, and it's good to be here.
And from the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, we're joined by Logic Shenjere. He is the Public Relations Officer. Welcome to the program, Logic.
Thank you, Farah. It's good to be here.
And joining us virtually via Zoom, we do thank you as well. We have Fiona Gandiwa Magaya. She is the gender specialist as well as head of education with the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. Fiona, great to have you on the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
To, I think, get the ball rolling, let's begin by just unpacking what we mean. What constitutes sexual harassment? Could you define that for us, Logic?
Yeah, there are a number of definitions of sexual harassment out there, but as a people, as a country, as Zimbabwe Gender Commission, we stand guided by what is captured in the normative framework, the international normative framework that speaks to gender-based violence and sexual gender-based violence, among other frameworks. So from these frameworks, what we can learn is that sexual harassment is any sex-based behavior that is unwelcome and or offensive to the recipient. So in other words, it is an act towards a person or persons that has unwelcome sexual connotations or offensive sexual effect. So it can come in the form of jokes, in the form of maybe it can be leering, it can be, you know, things that we send each other on WhatsApp. All those things, they border around sexual harassment. So there are about 4 words that we may need to underline here, Farai. And that's unwelcome, offensive, persistent, and then, most importantly, sexual.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Logic. Let me come to you, Fiona, very quickly. How prevalent would you say sexual harassment is from your own experience and your interactions with different stakeholders?
I think sexual harassment, from my experience, is very prevalent, almost up to 80 or 90% prevalent in the workplace, as well as even in the communities. It is very prevalent even in different organizations that I've interacted with.
I would want to ask, and I suppose when you say 80 to 90% prevalence, that is astounding, staggering. Could it be that people don't know what it is or don't know that they're actually committing it?
If you listen to the definition that my colleague here has given, I think it may be because some people may not be aware that they are offending others, or people do not report it because they are not aware of the law provisions and what protections they can have. And sometimes it may be an issue of power relations where the weaker person may be powerless to be able to report and protect themselves.
Abigail, what we often hear, or a term we often hear, is ignorance of the law is no defense. So the fact that people don't know they're actually doing this, and perhaps then bring you in to tell us, what does the law actually say about sexual harassment?
Thank you for that, Farai. So when we look at the law, the important place to start off with is the Constitution, because that's the supreme law of the land. And you find that in the Constitution, it protects the rights of all citizens, men and women in Zimbabwe. Their rights are protected by virtue of the Constitution. One of the key rights that is important in this discussion is the right to human dignity, and everybody having the right to live in a dignified manner. And so when you talk about sexual harassment, it is an act that infringes on your human dignity, and that is of concern. But beyond the Constitution, which is the broad overarching law, we do have the Labor Act, which specifically gives us sexual harassment as an act of unfair labor practice. So it does give us a starting point when we talk about those advances that are unwelcome, that are sexual in nature, but governing particularly what is happening within the workspace, and that's the Labor Relations Act. I would hasten to say that whilst we do have that, there has been progress to try and say, perhaps let's relook at the law itself, its adequacy in terms of giving provision, noting that sexual harassment happens across the divide and in many different sectors. So when we talk of law, we are really looking and anchoring around the the Labor Act that gives us sexual harassment as an unfair labor practice.
Fiona, let me come back to you very quickly and ask this. Again, coming back to the point you made earlier of this very high prevalence rate. Why does it continue to happen? Surely organizations should be tackling this if it's happening in the workplace. Surely organizations such as yours should be pointing this out and saying, look, this is happening, and trying to put an end to it. Tell us what is happening in that space.
Yes, different organizations are making efforts to raise awareness and to educate people. I think the Zimbabwe Gender Commission has been doing a lot. Our organization and many other civic organizations that we collaborate with have been doing a lot of work. But what happens is that the law itself has got gaps. And in most instances, it is very difficult to prove sexual harassment. If we take the Labor Act as an example, it is not very explicit in terms of its definition of sexual harassment and its provisions to protect victims, or its punitive measures to punish perpetrators. So in most instances, perpetrators may get away with it. And if even the police, in most instances, it's very difficult to go to the police and actually prove that you have been sexually harassed.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think, as you quite also made earlier, is actually knowing that you've been harassed. There might not be that awareness. And I want to now pick up on the one of the hats you wear on education. How should we be tackling and addressing this issue? Is it about educating and creating awareness, or just making the laws stiffer?
I think it should be both. Whilst we should improve our legislation for protective measures, we should also accelerate our education and awareness, because people need to actually be aware of their rights, to actually be aware of what exactly is sexual harassment as my brother is defined, and also what are the provisions of the law, what do I do, where do I go to report. all those things, people need to know that information. So it should be both strengthening our legislation as well as the awareness.
Logic, the definition you gave us highlighted 4 words. Unwelcome is the one I want to pick up on initially. If I say something and it's not told to me that it's unwelcome, what happens in that case? I mean, I'm just trying to understand here where it's very broad, some of the things that are defined as sexual harassment, and how do we then know that is this not a slippery slope where I might say something innocently or unknowingly and end up facing disciplinary action where the person simply turns around and says, that offended me?
Okay, I need to acknowledge, Farai, before I go any further, to say, when we are talking about or when we are dealing with sexual harassment, we are dealing with a very sensitive subject, and there are very thin lines between what is acceptable and what is not. So that is a fact. Mm-hmm. But then what we also need to point out is that in most cases, our acts, the recipients of our acts, they usually make it clear, either verbally or by other actions, they make it clear that they are not okay with it. They are not fine with what we are doing. But then there's a tendency of then persisting. Mm-hmm. That's when comes the word that we sought to underline, persistent. When we then begin to persist, sometimes, in most cases, it's clear, it's made clear, or we are told that this is unwelcome. Mm-hmm. Or we can sense it on our own as normal human beings to say, what I've said here was unwelcome to him or to her. But then the problem is sometimes we keep on persisting, and then that becomes an issue. In any case, we are supposed as human beings to just try and live within normal, zones of human space. When we live, there are zones of human space where we live. At work, there are people that we joke with certain jokes. There are people that we don't. There are people that we laugh with certain stories. There are people that we don't. So those zones of human space, sometimes the more we transcend or the more we violate those zones of human space, the more we are likely to commit offenses that relate to sexual harassment.
Fiona, what is it that you would want to see come out of this public hearing process?
We expect our parliament to also enhance the process of the Labour Amendment, which is currently in progress, to include strengthened provisions on the sexual harassment issue on Section 8, where the Labour Act attempts to define and talk about sexual harassment, and give protection to victims as well as stiff penalties to perpetrators of sexual harassment, including a clear definition with the different forms of harassment that can be found in the workplace. And then we also expect the parliament to also have a comprehensive law on sexual harassment that will also protect everyone else, even those people that are not in the Labour Act, people that are in the informal, people that are in the rural. Every citizen must be protected. So a comprehensive law on sexual harassment will also go a long way to protect all the citizens of Zimbabwe with stiff penalties for perpetrators of violence.
Time to take a short break. We will come back and continue this discussion. Stay tuned. It is the Rebound series. Every Zimbabwean wants their country to return to its former glory, and we believe that we have a role to play in doing that. So we'll be speaking to different Zimbabweans from different facets of life to share their views of what it will take to get Zimbabwe to rebound. The Rebound series comes to you every Friday between 5 and 6 p.m. on the Heart and Soul digital platforms. Join me, Farai Mwakutuya, for those incisive discussions. Welcome back. It is the Rebound series. We continue our discussion focusing on sexual harassment and just trying to unpack what it is, understand issues of awareness, but also how we can tackle it given its very high prevalence. We're told earlier 80 to 90% prevalent in the workplace and elsewhere in our society. Let me ask you, Abigail, and perhaps even Logic here in the studio. We've heard that it's very difficult to prove sexual harassment or to prove that I have been harassed. But are there any on record now cases that have actually been proven where someone has successfully said I've been harassed, and what has happened in those actions? Do we have examples?
Yes, and I will speak to cases that have gone through the court system, and give Logic an opportunity perhaps to speak to cases that have gone through the Gender Commission to investigate. But in terms of the court system, there are examples of cases that have gone through where individuals have taken, whether it's companies or specific perpetrators, to court around issues of sexual harassment without perhaps naming the specific individuals involved. I'll give an example of a case where a woman who was working for a particular bank took a case to court where she had been harassed by a senior executive within that institution, and subsequently she also sued the organization as a whole in terms of them failing to provide a conducive work environment where, sexual harassment was thriving. And that case was successful, and she was awarded damages for the harm that she had suffered at an individual level, but as well as the company had been penalized for failing to take action against such behavior within the institution. The company was penalized because initially when the harassment occurred, she did make a report within the internal disciplinary systems, but they didn't yield much, and so it meant the behavior continued to thrive, and she actually lost her job in the process, and then she ultimately decided to take that matter through the courts. A different example, another woman was harassed in public space whilst walking boarding combis, and she was verbally insulted with sexual connotations, there was name calling, etc. She also took that matter to court, and the perpetrator was brought to book. So there are examples of cases where individuals have, taken the step to make reports. But I will hasten to say that you find that there is a glaring gap between the prevalence rate and the actual reported cases, which is an issue of concern. So that's perhaps a point to note, to say we've got to encourage more individuals who are harassed to actually take that bold step and make the report.
Before I come to you, Logic, and perhaps you could also come in on this, is it because we've seen formation or setting up of victim-friendly units, for instance, for rape cases? Is it because the people who you are meant to report to may not actually appreciate or be aware of how they deal with some of these cases? Why could that be the reason why there's a low reported case rate?
Yes, I think in terms of the question, why are they low reports, you find that it's a mixed bag of issues. Certainly the issue of awareness plays a part. At times individuals are not aware as to the steps to take. So it has occurred, it has happened, but where do I go to report? What do I need to do? You find that there are those challenges. And if it's within the workspace, some work spaces don't have policies that clearly articulate this is the reporting channel, this is what you need to do. And that also at times deters individuals from making reports. But over and above that, you also find the issue of the power dynamics that had been mentioned earlier. At times, your perpetrator is high up the ranks, and you are weighing the impact of making such a report, or perhaps you are reporting to individuals that are actually connected to the case. So those variables certainly affect one's ability to actually make the report. Another issue that you might have, I think earlier on there was a mention of the evidence. This usually happens in private space. So it's Abigail and Farai, and it's my word against yours, what actually took place. Or, you've sent an unwelcome joke, I've told you, I find that unwelcome, and you perhaps say, oh, no. There's nothing special about it. I was just, you know, making a comment perhaps on your appearance. So the issue of, you know, getting the evidence together tends to also discourage people to make reports, because it's he said, she said, and it's the two of us, which also creates certain problems.
And I think I would also imagine which I think is something that's also important and needs to be addressed. I would also imagine that there is a social or cultural, for lack of a better term, impact. So if, for instance, you report that in this case, Farai made an inappropriate comment about this and that, it might also be deemed to say, perhaps you invited it. Or, you know, we often hear, you know, the example you made of the lady boarding public transport. Society will say, but you addressed that way. It's you invited it. So I think those are also some issues that come to play. Yeah.
There's certainly a lot of victim blaming that goes on, where, you know, there are questions raised to say, why you? There are so many women in this institution. Why did Farai particularly pick Abigail? You must have done something that, you know, gave him the sense that the gesture is welcome. You must have, you know, presented yourself in a particular way. But I think at the back of all that is always the issue of abuse of power. It's always related to that. There's somebody that is in a more powerful position that has a particular opinion about, you know, the conduct of a woman or the conduct of a man, or wants to use their power over that individual. So let's have a relationship and then I give you a job. It might not have anything to do with, you know, the way I've presented myself to you, but it's simply because you have power over me and you're exercising it in that fashion. Or for me to give, you know, one of the prevalent examples that always comes up when you talk of sexual harassment is the education sector. You know, for you to pass this exam, you must, you know, give me something quid pro quo. So those are some of the challenges that you find that are there, and unfortunately, because society tends to always think there is something that the victim, which is a word I use with so much caution, because, you know, we term them survivors now, you find that they would blame you. So even if you remove sexual harassment and you look at rape, it's always, what did you do? Why were you there at a given time? You know, why? So there's that tendency to focus on the particular survivor as opposed to look at the perpetrator. Why does the perpetrator think this is right? Indeed. Yet it's unwelcome.
Logic, let me turn to you. From what Abigail is saying, there are obviously reports and complaints and cases that have gone through the courts, but some that have been brought to you. Perhaps you could shed more light in terms of the examples of sexual harassment that, as a commission, you're dealing with.
Yeah, thank you, Farai. But probably before I speak into the specific examples, I just want to add to what my colleague has said in respect of the issues that arise when people report sexual harassment. I think one issue that is huge, that is massive, which is also very negative, relates to the repercussions of the subject matter upon or after reporting. I mean, when I'm talking about, we highlighted earlier on that sexual harassment is a very sensitive subject. So it's sometimes the issue to do with secondary trauma that the survivor will have to endure. For example, when you report a case, you need to follow it through. And then when in the process of following your case through, maybe as providing, you know, with a proof or appearing before either the commission or the courts or whichever institution, sometimes the survivors go through what we call secondary trauma. So it's the problems that they went through, the hate that they went through, it's replayed all over again. And many people are not comfortable with that. And also the fact that when you report sexual harassment, it's bound to then move from where it happened into the public domain.
Sure.
And then many people, particularly women, are not are very uncomfortable when the issue gets into the public domain for reasons that Abigail have said. And I might also just want to add a simple example to say, for example, sexual harassment happens against married women at the workplace. And again, for her to then report that to the husband and to the in-laws, and the whole chain, it takes her back into a vicious cycle. You know, that she's going to be blamed, like what Abigail has said, she's going to be blamed, and she's going to, you know, all those things. So that's one thing that I needed to add on to that. But then, coming on to the specific examples that we have handled as a commission relating to sexual harassment, I think I'm at liberty to talk about two specific examples. One example that came from NAC, the National AIDS Council. We handled a case. It was a big case that came from NAC, and we've concluded it as well. We submitted recommendations to the relevant authorities and institutions, and action has taken place. And even though a few other things remain from our recommendations, but we are glad to say action has taken place or is taking place. Then we also had quite a prominent issue from the immigration. I think many people have heard about it. It has been reported even in the press. We handled that case. We received the complaint, and we handled that case. We investigated the case, and we concluded on the case. And our recommendations, again, we submitted to the relevant institutions, and redress action is taken place or is taking place. So for this conversation, I will disclose those two, but I just want to emphasize that we have received many cases of sexual harassment at both individual and institutional level. Indeed. Yes.
What is to be done to encourage people, to empower women to come out and to speak about these issues? This is about raising awareness or providing support platforms and networks for them so that they are able to know that if I actually pursue this action, you know, there will be redress, there will be compensation, I will be heard, and you know, my issue will be resolved.
I think there are a number of things that we need to do, definitely. One area relates to what Abigail has said, the gaps within our legislative and policy framework. I think we need to really work on those gaps, so that at least victims or survivors of sexual harassment are aware or have enough protection from the legal or policy point of view. That's one area that we need to work on. We, in that respect, Farai, we need, as a people and as a country, to have an act of parliament that is specific, that is unambiguously clear on sexual harassment. At the moment, like what Abigail said, we don't have. We have the Labour Act, which classifies sexual harassment as an unfair labour practice. Or in other words, we have other legal provisions where it's classified as indecent assault, and then the whole crime then loses its significance, and then ultimately it attracts minimal or insignificant judgments from the court. So these are the things that we need to do. We also need to work on awareness. We also need to work on awareness. It's one massive area that we need to work on. People have to be aware that such an act is in itself sexual harassment. People have to be aware that I can report this to these institutions, be it the police or be it to Zimbabwe Gender Commission, as part of the soft justice mechanism system.
Indeed. Yes. Very important point you make there, and we'll come back and continue the discussion. I think now focusing on, you know, the way forward, the awareness you're talking about, where do people go, and I also crucially what we want to come out, what specifically we want to come out of these public hearings, how we want the laws to be addressed or amended. My name is Farai Mwakutuya. The discussion continues on the Rebound series. Do stay with us. Every Zimbabwean wants their country to return to its former glory, and we believe that we have a role to play in doing that. So we'll be speaking to different Zimbabweans from different facets of life to share their views of what it will take to get Zimbabwe to rebound. The Rebound series comes to you every Friday between 5 and 6 p.m. on the Heart and Soul digital platforms. Join me, Farai Mwakutuya, for those incisive discussions. Welcome back. We continue the discussion where we are focusing on sexual harassment in the studio. I have Abigail Machai. She's the director of Zimbabwe Women Lawyers Association, as well as Logic Shenjere from the Zimbabwe Gender Commission. I'd like to put it to you, Abigail. You know, given the fine lines that have been mentioned by Logic, given the fact that, you know, some of the things that perhaps people do, I mean, people on WhatsApp groups now, people are sitting and forwarding all sorts of things. Some of those things that we might do unknowingly could land people in trouble. Is there no risk that workplaces, for instance, may simply take the safer route of saying, you know what, perhaps let's not employ women, because if we do, we might end up in trouble for things that we think are normal or commonplace, or that we can do and think that they are harmless?
I think the first thing is to state that sexual harassment happens to both men and women. So whilst the greater majority of cases perhaps might be towards women in terms of numbers, but that doesn't rule away the fact that a man can be sexually harassed. So for those that would perhaps think that the best approach is not to employ women, they are not necessarily curing the problem, because ultimately even men can be sexually harassed. And that in itself is against the law that gives equal opportunities to both men and women in terms of our constitution. In terms of addressing it at workplace level, one of the things that we need to start seeing are the policies in place within each and every workplace, where you have a sexual harassment policy in place that will bridge the awareness gaps by having education and awareness sessions within the workplace. It will also address defining what is sexual harassment. You know, if you have come across, for instance, companies where they will specifically state that employees cannot have a love relationship. If they do, they must make a declaration, because it then creates that thin line to say, you know, is your conduct appropriate within the workplace? You also want that policy to look at what are the reporting channels. So if you have been harassed at whatever level, you know, where do you go? Who do you report to? Do you go to HR? Is there a specific office that you make the report? And ultimately, what are the penalties? So the report has been made, investigations are done, you know, what actions are taken. And that's, I think, at company or workplace level. But beyond that, perhaps more in the general sense, is to ensure that our laws comprehensively define sexual harassment, so that we don't have these gray lines of, okay, you know, Farah is thinking, well, I didn't harass, I was just making a general comment. You know, you want clear definitions so that we all know that these are the 5 things, or this is what sexual harassment means in Zimbabwe. And then, you know, we can start from there.
In terms of reporting, and now coming up with, I suppose, best practices, as the Gender Commission, are there any recommendations you might have to say, look, this is how we handle it? Could whistleblower, for instance, or anonymous sort of reporting, because whereas I might see someone being harassed or being taken advantage of because of the power dynamics, am I able to come and also report it and be protected and not then be stigmatized or ostracized? As an example, what else what does the Zimbabwe Gender Commission recommend in terms of how we handle the reporting and handling of such cases?
Yeah, what we recommend, Farah, is that cases of sexual harassment must be reported. That's one thing that we need to underline, that it must be reported. Mm-hmm. Then we need to pursue the means of reporting. Whistleblowing is one of them, and it's acceptable. As a commission, we have received a number of cases whereby people come in and say, this is happening at this institution, but maybe they are not willing to be part of the processes. We take those cases and we pursue those cases. So if we have whistleblowers in respect of sexual harassment at individual level, at institutional level, it's acceptable at Zimbabwe Gender Commission. Mm-hmm. And also, what we also do at Zimbabwe Gender Commission, when we have had cases whereby people feel that sexual harassment has happened probably at the workplace, and it's being perpetrated by influential people within the workplace. Sometimes it's the HR people, mm-hmm. the very same people that you're supposed to raise the issue with. So, but we are saying as Zimbabwe Gender Commission, as a soft justice mechanism system, we receive those cases. But then maybe what we then do is that we come back to the very same institution to say we have received a case like A, B, C, D, and we want that case to be dealt with. And we monitor that case from point A until point Z. But Farah, having said that,
when does it, sorry, so I'm just asking, when does it move from being an HR, flouting an HR regulation to being a criminal act? Or is, is there a line? Is sexual harassment, when does it move from, in my organization, I flouted the rule because I've done this, and at what point does it then become a criminal?
At the moment, like what we've said, Farah, at the moment it's not criminal.
Okay.
Because we have no law that says so. Okay. So at the moment, it's an unfair labor practice, or it's indecent assault at most. So at the moment, it's not criminal. It remains, within those gray areas. But that's very, very unfortunate, which is something that we need to work on. But before you came in with that question, I wanted to add to your previous question on people who would think, or organizations who would think, let us employ women, or let us employ men, and not employ women. I want us to underline the fact that sexual harassment is also happening among men, between men and the men. Mm-hmm. So that narrative then falls away, mm-hmm. to say, let us employ men. There will be sexual harassment, mm-hmm. even between women and women themselves. They sexually harass each other. But well, maybe that can be a subject for another day. But also, for academic purposes, Farah, I just wanted to say, if we can have that thinking, that narrative to say, why don't we employ men alone? Why don't we have it in the reverse matrix to say, why don't we employ women alone and not employ men? I mean, for academic purposes.
How empowered are you as a commission to actually follow up? You say you go to those organizations where you've heard of harassment and you then follow the case. You say you want it dealt with and then follow it. How do you have the teeth to make sure that it's dealt with properly, that it's not swept under the carpet, or there's just window dressing? Okay, let's appear to have had a hearing and give this, whoever the perpetrator, a slap on the wrist. Do you have the teeth to say, no, we are not happy with how it's been dealt with? You haven't gone far enough.
As Zimbabwe Gender Commission, we do have the teeth, but we do not have enough teeth, if I may say so. We do have the teeth, but maybe we don't have enough teeth. There are other things that we would want in terms of power. We need to be empowered more. But then, one thing that I can safely say is that we have enough teeth to bite as a commission. I've given you the example, mm-hmm. of the two institutions, very big institutions, mm-hmm. that we dealt with. And I can go on to say, when the process is started, most of the perpetrators, they thought that Zimbabwe Gender Commission is just another institution. We can do whatever we want. Mm-hmm. But we reined in on them, and we were very, very hard on them to say we are a constitutional body created by the Constitution in terms of Section 245 and 46, where our functions are. And because of that, we are also operationalized by the Zimbabwe Gender Commission Act, which gives us, the power and the teeth to bite.
I now want to bring in, it's a point that was made earlier by Fiona before she had to leave the meeting, was it's not just in the workplace. Obviously, a lot of the cases that you've dealt with and you've mentioned here are in the workplace. And as we know, we're in a highly informalized economy, so a lot of people aren't formally employed. What is being done to ensure that those who face it there, is it the Gender Commission where they come? Perhaps they work in a flea market, or they're doing their own thing and they do get harassed. Is it the police, Gender Commission? Where do they go in? And what's being done to empower those who may not have the formal channels that are in place that they can pursue?
Yeah, in terms of empowering such a sector, I think the best way around it is to do public awareness. And as a commission, we've done quite a number of them. I remember before the lockdown, we went around the major, bus termini, mm-hmm. with the message to say sexual harassment is an offense. And we were very clear on that. And our target audience was the touts around those areas, and also the victims around those areas, to say there are so many ways of reporting if it's in that sector. The Gender Commission is there to receive all complaints. The police is there as well to receive such complaints as well, and to deal with such complaints as well. We are also working with the police in order to share notes on how to deal with some of these sensitive issues. But basically, Farai, we need to underline the fact that we need to do a massive public awareness on sexual harassment in every sphere of our lives, because for sure, it is rampant across every sphere of our lives. It is also common in church, Farai, of other places. I mean, those are some of the things. It's happening. It's true. We have evidence, as in cases, to say it's happening in the church. So it's really, really rampant.
The issue of awareness that's just been raised, and as I think it's important that you say across all spectrums, because when you mentioned the touts, I certainly have heard cases of schoolgirls who are given, or are able to get to the front of the queue or get a seat in the front seat of a commuter taxi in return for certain favors. So should we be taking this to that level, and are there mechanisms to ensure that we are educating everyone from that grassroots level?
Yes, certainly awareness needs to happen across the board and to go to the people as much as possible, because this is where the cases are at and this is where things are happening. In terms of these awareness programs, certainly more can be done to have a national program that kind of covers all sectors, but we are cognizant of the efforts that are being done by different institutions and different organizations in terms of just raising awareness to say, do you actually know that, such jokes are actually sexual harassment, and these connotations are unacceptable, particularly when they're sexual in nature. So we would have to continue to raise awareness so that we get to a point that survivors are empowered enough and have enough knowledge to be able to actually take action against it. Yes.
We must take another short break now and continue our discussion. We are focusing on sexual harassment in view of ongoing public hearings by Parliament, two portfolio committees of Parliament that are undertaking hearings on public hearings on sexual harassment, and that is the topic of our discussion today, which will continue after this short break. Every Zimbabwean wants their country to return to its former glory, and we believe that we have a role to play in doing that. So we'll be speaking to different Zimbabweans from different facets of life to share their views of what it will take to get Zimbabwe to rebound. The Rebound series comes to you every Friday between 5 and 6 p.m. on the Heart and Soul digital platforms. Join me, Farai Mwakutuya, for those incisive discussions. Welcome back to the program. It is the Rebound series. Before we went to the break, Abigail, you did mention the need to intensify the awareness programs. How easy will it be to influence people, to change the way that they view this? Because some of these practices or some of these things that people do are entrenched culturally. I'll give an example that we often see where if, for instance, you have the same totem as my wife, for instance, people say, and that could be perceived as harassment. So given that some of these things are things that we've done and seem very commonplace, some of them entrenched in culture, how easy will it be to win this battle?
I think with anything that speaks to behavior change, it's something that we are in for the long haul, because behaviors perhaps might not change as quickly as you'd want them to, but certainly that shouldn't dent the effort in terms of trying to address that. Even as you put in place laws, it might not necessarily lead to automatic behavior change because the law is there. But then having said that, that doesn't mean that we will not address the legal gaps that have been highlighted earlier. So I think it's being cognizant that behavior change is something that we need to invest over time. It might not happen as quickly as we want, but it will certainly happen. And I think what is encouraging is the cases that you're actually seeing being reported. The Gender Commission spoke about big institutions. So that already has sent a signal to any other institution out there that you can actually be held accountable for such an act. I've spoken about court cases where companies have been held accountable for failing to address it within the institution. So those progressive steps at whatever level will give us hope that we can certainly achieve behavior change in the long run.
Fiona earlier made mention of the ILO Convention 190, and we do know that that speaks to specifically setting up safe reporting mechanisms, which you've spoken about within the workplace, whistleblower, and also providing that psychosocial support for survivors. That's something I would like to come to now. You did make mention, as you said, the secondary trauma. So in addition to ensuring that we have laws, in addition to ensuring that people are heard, is the Gender Commission also looking to ensure that those who have survived get the psychological support and social support that they require?
Yes, that's a narrative that is very important to the Commission, the psychosocial support part of the resolution mechanism system relating to such cases of sexual harassment, because that is very, very necessary, to the survivor. And as a Commission, we may not have that solid system to provide such, but we are happy to say we work with development partners and the civil community organizations, the CSOs, that are well versed into that. And most importantly, we also work with the Ministry of Women Affairs, and those government departments, they are also somehow resourced to offer psychosocial support to survivors of gender-based violence or sexual harassment in particular. So that national response system in its entirety, it is quite effective when it comes to the provision of psychosocial support to survivors. But well, we also need to underline the fact that a lot more needs to be done. A lot more needs to be done. Like, we also need to look into, some payments of some sort, for lack of a better word, to say if we have compensation, yes, compensation for that. I think that's a narrative that is, within the Commission, to say how do we then enhance issues like compensation to the survivors of sexual harassment.
As we look to do this more that you talk about, are there any international best practice or other jurisdictions that we are looking at and saying, look, okay, they have a model law or framework that, or policy that we should actually be bringing here and adopting?
Yes, I think when we look at the ILO convention, beyond the C190 that has been made reference to, there are a number of other recommendations and other conventions that speak to, addressing some of these issues in a more holistic fashion. So I think what has been lacking in terms of looking at it at national level within Zimbabwe is that at times we do not ratify these instruments, or we are not party to them. So they always create a gap because they are, ideal, but they're out there and they're not necessarily here or applying to us, because there are certain steps that we need to take. So in making a recommendation in that regard, it could be saying to us that we've got to ratify these instruments, and beyond the ratification process, which is more legalistic in nature, we've also got to create our own laws that speak to that. And if you look at all the international frameworks, they are broadly trying to address the issue in a comprehensive manner, so that someone is able to get legal justice, they can get the psychosocial support, you are addressing the issue at community level, you are addressing the education in a holistic fashion, which is not what we have at the moment. Because at the moment, when you only operate within the confines of the Labour Act, you are by and large just regulating a very small portion of the citizens in the country, and it's almost like you're saying, well, everywhere else it's okay for it but just in the workplace is where we have an issue, which is not what we should be saying. We should simply be saying we've got this problem that we have, and we've got to make sure that we have institutions, laws, and policies in place that function to address that particular challenge that we have.
Indeed, I think that the point I love the point you made there, where it shouldn't just be legalistic. Let's be very holistic about it. And on that note, I will turn to you and say, as the Gender Commission, from these public hearings that are ongoing, what would be the next steps from here?
Yeah, what we have done so far is to be part of the public hearings that are going on as a commission, and the team that has been out there is consolidated a report, in respect of what came out. And we are also going to consider other reports from other institutions that we work with that have also been part of this consultative process. And then from there, we will then consolidate what is there, and then we are probably going to have a single opposition or a position that we have consensus on, that we can then keep on pushing, you know, with the government, particularly because we know government is the major stakeholder when it comes to, you know, the promulgation of legislation, and also other arms of state like the parliament and other, you know, stakeholders. So we will then begin a little later after this formal engagements with those institutions, government, parliament, and other, you know, stakeholders that have been involved, to then consolidate the positions and move the story forward.
I think an important point to note, which I think you know will benefit a lot to this particular drive and movement, is the role of citizen action in all this. As I understand it from the research I've done, these petitions were driven by the fact that there were a particular group of people who petitioned and said, look, we want this area of sexual harassment addressed, and this is what's led to where we are now. So I think other groups, students in tertiary institutions, amongst others, could also step forward and say, look, if Gender Commission is not moving as fast as we like, let's prod them, let's petition them, let's make noise and be vocal about it. Is the environment, do you think people are ready to take up that action? What can be done to encourage them to do that?
I think part of the encouragement is also knowing where to plug in. So in the legislative process by Parliament, they have just done the consultative meetings, but there's yet to be the debate in Parliament, and members or citizens are able to actually engage their MPs directly, are able to make written submissions to Parliament in the event that, for instance, they missed the opportunity to engage within the consultative processes, to say these are the recommendations that we want addressed. They are still able to engage the different institutions that will be, you know, working around the issue, because there are still opportunities over and above the consultative processes that have gone on, to say we need this addressed. And also at more maybe localized level, if for instance in the event of students, they could even engage the education institutions directly. If it's a polytechnic, you know, we must have something whilst we wait for the national process, but we must have something now to address some of our concerns. They can also be making reports and supporting you know, people they know that have succumbed to sexual harassment, because it's a known secret in some of these spaces, you know, where people know, oh, you know, lecturer X, that's what he's known for, and everybody just says, oh, just, you know, let it just be. Yes. Or else you'll never pass. It's not a major thing. Yeah. So, you know, there are immediate things that people can do, even at within their sector, that helps address this issue. And one of it could be supporting somebody to say, you know, let's take action. Some of it might even be group reporting. I think the Gender Commission spoke about whistleblowing, you know, where you say we are having challenges with, you know, lecturer X at institution Y, and then that activates all the investigations and actions by different institutions. So there are actions that citizens can be able to do and to take to be able to address this scourge.
Thank you so much, and on that note, we must end the discussion, but I want to thank you both for coming through. I also want to thank our guest earlier, Fiona, who was joining us via Zoom for a very informative discussion. And I think the key takeaways are that, you know, we need to do more, certainly, but also there is a call to action. We can start to do things in our own spheres and in our own areas to ensure that we cap down this you know, high prevalence rate. Earlier Fiona had said 80 to 90%, which again is astounding and staggering, and something that needs to be addressed. But thank you so much, Abigail.
Thank you so much, Farai.
Thank you so much, Logic.
Thank you so much for that.
And that does it, viewers, for this edition of the Rebound series. Abigail Machai is a director from the Zimbabwe Women Lawyers Association. Logic Shenjere is the public relations officer from the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, and earlier via Zoom we're joined joined by Fiona Gandiwa Magaya. She is the gender specialist as well as head of education at the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. My name is Farai Mwakutuya. This program has been brought to you courtesy of the HstvZim She Leads project with support from the Embassy of Ireland in Pretoria. Be sure to join us again next week when we bring you another edition of this program called the Rebound Series. Bye-bye.
This program was brought to you by the HstvZim She Leads project with support from Embassy of Ireland in Pretoria.